this evening we're very lucky. We've got Christine Aziz with us, a winner of the Richard and Judy Prize for the Olive Readers. Um, Christine, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Um, well, I mean, I guess because we're sort of part of the literary festival, so I guess I'll talk about the writing. Um, I've It was the only thing I was ever quite good at school. I was hopeless at maths or anything else, and I was always writing loads of stories, going off into a dream world of my own, and so it was something I've always done, and I've loved words and letters and the shapes of them and what things meant, and
Yeah.
it's all very verbal. Um, and so I became, by sheer fluke, I became a journalist, which of course involved writing of a particular kind. And
Yeah.
you're very bound by facts, you're bound by deadlines. And I sort of travelled quite a bit doing that, and went to some quite difficult conflict areas, etc. And then I moved down to Bournemouth. I'm a Londoner and I lived in London. I moved down to Dorset to be with my mother,
Mhm.
who had developed Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Um, so while I was doing my journalism, I was always writing stuff that wasn't journalistic, that allowed my imagination to go. So, like a lot of writers, I had just like loads of half-finished novels in my drawer, bits of short stories.
Yeah.
I always wrote poetry, always like lists of ideas and everything. So it was a mess. It was a mess. But I'd sort of committed myself to writing, to finishing something.
Mm.
And I was a single parent, so I was bringing up small children, etc., etc. So as I got older, it got a bit easier. And I started this story, which I thought was going to be a short story, and it developed into something a bit longer. And I'd done about half of it, and I kept thinking, I must finish it, I must finish it. So when I moved down to Dorset, I met up with a friend, and we used to meet together in a cafe, and we used to write.
Wow, nice.
And then she said to me, we used to sort of like to encourage each other, really.
Yeah.
So, and I would recommend anyone to do this, to get a writing buddy, because it really does help, and it pushes you, and you can read your stuff out, and and it gets you out of the house. You get together. And she said to me, "Look, Richard and Judy have got this novel writing, how to getting published contest. Go send it in." And I said, "Well, I haven't finished it yet." She said, "Well, you don't have to. Just send in what you've got." And I didn't really know anything about Richard and Judy. I know my mum used to sit there watching them, but I never had a chance to watch them. I was busy sorting her out and getting her stuff done and everything, and food and blah, blah. So she kept on at me, and so I thought, okay, I'll send it. So very last minute, I sent it off, and I just completely forgot about it. I was still sort of tinkering with it, kept trying to keep on with it, finish it. And then I suddenly got a phone call out of the blue from the Richard and Judy office telling me I'd been longlisted, like 26 entries. And I thought, oh, wow. And I thought, oh, God, I better check up on what, this whole Richard and Judy prize thing. And it was 50 grand. I mean, that was the thing that shocked me. And I thought, plus it was huge. I didn't realise it was as big as it was at that time. I think it was one of the first ones, if not the first one. And there's a lot of publicity around it. And I thought, well, if I've been longlisted, this is great. If I send it in, I can say I've been longlisted for the Richard and Judy Prize. It would be, good for my portfolio.
Yeah.
So then I got another call to say I'd been shortlisted.
Wow.
So I was one of 5.
Oh, wow.
And then I had to go up to London. I was arranged care for my mum and all this. And I went up and I met up with Maria Raitt, who was the Macmillan's editor at the time and was sort of responsible for the competition. I met Richard and Judy and the other people, writers who'd been shortlisted. And then it got to the point where I'm sitting in the studio, it's live, and they make the announcement. And even at that point, I just thought, I've got this far. I'm so grateful. Yeah. I'm really happy to, I don't know. I think I went into a bit of a shock really before I even won. And then they announced it. And I thought, this is what it must feel like for people when they get the Oscars or something. You just go, your mind goes blank. And I'm standing there. And in fact, my daughter said afterwards, she said, Mum, you just stood there. You got up and you stood there and you were looking like a headless chicken, and nobody came up to give you a cuddle. It was just, it felt quite lonely, and it was sort
Yeah.
of, and I just thought, blimey, I've won this. And then after that, it just went crazy. Then I learned I only had about like 8 weeks to finish it. I'm
Wow.
not a fast I'm not a fast writer. I didn't
Yeah.
have a clue how it was going to end. I'm one of those shambolic writers. I don't plan things.
Mm. Mm.
I have a vague idea how the ending is. I'm trying to change this. I think probably life is a lot easier if you sort of know where you're going with things. But, I kept having these characters come in who wanted to do things differently, how I wanted them to do it. And it took on a life of its own, really. So in that 8 weeks, my grandson was born. So there was that going on in London. I had to move my flat, had to move flats. I was looking after my mother. I was cooking all her meals and putting
Yeah.
them in the freezer and supervising the carer went in. I just remember being absolutely exhausted, and my kitchen being an absolute state. And whenever I had a spare moment or I felt like I needed a break, I would watch Midsummer Murders. And I don't know why I did that. I'd lie on the couch and I'd watch Midsummer Murders for about half an hour.
Yeah.
So whenever I hear the music to that program, it just takes me back. I don't know. And then they said, could you finish it earlier because Tesco's want it in their supermarkets?
Oh my God.
And I thought, oh, and then I said, I think I need an agent. They said, no, you don't need an agent. Don't worry about it. And the publicity around it wasn't me. They didn't want it be known that I was a journalist because they thought I might know Richard and Judy. So suddenly I was this grandmother in the attic writing.
Yeah.
And they created this press release and some that wasn't me.
Yeah.
That sort of denied my 25 years of like hard-working journalism, etc.
Yeah.
And it all suddenly started to feel out of control.
Yeah.
And I was writing. I remember walking along Bournemouth Beach all the time, trying to think, what I was going to do next and how it's going to develop. And to be honest, and it was picked up in reviews when people reviewed it, and they're absolutely right that the second half wasn't as good as the first half, and it was not the book that I wanted it to be. And I sometimes think about rewriting it, but I'm really grateful for it in many, many ways, and it was great for my confidence in a way. But I think the aftermath of it, I think I felt quite traumatized, to be quite honest. I think looking back, but I feel very ungrateful saying this because everybody.
No, not at all. Because actually, it's an awful lot of pressure to suddenly, when they've only asked for maybe the first 3 chapters, say, for instance, and then suddenly you've got to deliver a book. I'd imagine that was an awful lot of stress, just that on its own, without everything else that you were having to deal with. So fair play for getting it finished,
I mean, on the other hand, being a journalist, it's always about deadlines. So I'm a deadline junkie. So actually having that deadline to finish it was quite useful, but I wish it hadn't been, only 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem when you're getting a book done. There's nobody, unless you're with a particular publisher who wants you to churn them out and say, right, you've got to get the next book out for the next year.
Yeah.
Unless you've got a deadline, I find it quite difficult. So it was quite useful in that way, but it was, and I didn't write anything for a long time afterwards. And I guess I should have capitalized on it.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I mean, they had 46,000 entries. I mean, that's a huge.
It is an incredible story, Christine. It really is. And obviously,
I hope I don't sound miserable.
No, not at all, not at all. It was nice. Obviously, when we'd emailed each other, you did send me an article on it, and I was just gobsmacked at the chain of events that had happened in the lead up to you actually delivering the book. And I just thought, I can't even imagine what that pressure is. But as you say, being a journalist, that's something you're quite accustomed to. So that was actually quite handy that your previous background, your career had helped out in that way. With regards to the Olive readers, how How did you come up with that story? Where did that idea come from?
Well, it's very strange actually. I've always written and I've always had ideas, but there was a point in my life where I'd stand at bus stops and I'd look at people and make up stories about them. And there came a point in my life where I just couldn't do that anymore. And I felt like something had died within me.
Right.
I felt something bad had happened and I couldn't work out why I was like that and I missed it. But I was also churning stuff out for the newspapers and being the single mum and everything. But it bothered me and I didn't have an appetite to go back to anything I was writing. And I wasn't getting the ideas, and I'd stand at the bus stop and just wait for the bus, which is quite unusual. Well, that's what you're meant to do. But and I made myself go to my little office at the top of the house when we were living in London. And I said to myself, and the kids were asleep, I said, I am not leaving this room until I have written something.
Yeah.
And I sat there and I sat there and I sat there. And it was like, squeezing a dry lemon. And suddenly I got a sentence. And suddenly, and the idea that I was going to do a short story, right? Yeah. And it was this woman, and she was in a boat, and she was on the lake, and she was rowing, and there was something in the boat, and there was a weight in the boat, and she's rowing in this boat, so it's quite mysterious. And I'm thinking, who is this woman? And then she gets out of the boat. I can't remember it all now, but she gets out of the boat and she goes up to this huge house, but it's set in somewhere like Greece or somewhere like that, and there are all these olive trees.
Yeah.
And I could see all that. And she knocks on the door, and I think there are dogs barking. I can't remember. Suddenly I'd written something, so I was really relieved. And I suddenly thought, who is this woman, and what has she got in the boat, in the rowing boat?
Yeah.
And I had to write a bit more to find out who she was.
Yeah.
And what she had in that boat.
Yeah.
And for some reason it was in the future. I knew it wasn't in the present and it wasn't in the past. And I'm not a huge sci-fi dystopian fan, to be quite honest. I do like Margaret Atwood's dystopian novels. Yeah. And J.D. Ballard or J.G. Ballard, I can't remember. But suddenly it was in the future, and it was something I was quite concerned about, was the power that corporations were having.
Yeah.
And suddenly it was this world that was controlled by corporations. There were no states anymore. Everything had been divided into sort of areas of production. There was no information. If you were caught with a book, you were executed. It was that sort of thing. It was quite Orwellian in a sense, but it was involving this young woman and her sister in this country that was the olive country. And so the revolutionaries are the readers, the people who are able to get books. So there are all these hidden libraries.
Wow.
So that's how it developed, but it started.
Incredible, just from like one sentence. How lovely to have that, where it, your subconscious has obviously been picking up these little snippets from somewhere and has brought you to that point. And I actually quite like the idea that you didn't even know yourself who that woman was, that you needed to explore that a little bit more. And that's lovely. That's, to me, is what writing's about, because you have to be excited about it yourself in order to write it. So that must have been quite a nice moment to think, oh yeah, I need to write a bit more here just to find out who she is.
I know, writers often say, well, I've got writer's block and I haven't written anything for ages. But I think what that experience taught me in a way was that actually at a deep subconscious level, you are still working.
Yeah.
And even if you're suddenly things are happening in the family or having to do loads of work and you can't sit down and you can't get to it.
Yeah.
When you're washing the dishes or when you're doing your garden or whatever you're doing, or you're doing the shopping, or you're just sitting having a coffee somewhere. And quite often it happens when I'm sitting with friends, I just go off, but it's and you're not aware of it, but I do believe that it's something's going on
Yes,
at a
I
deep level,
agree.
and it rises up, it sort of percolates, it comes and it comes and it comes. So I think sometimes we beat ourselves too much over the head too much, because we get frustrated and we think we're not doing anything.
Yeah.
But I think it's an ongoing process. And also I always remember somebody saying to me, you don't think of the story chooses you.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
sort of agree with that. Yeah, I do.
yeah,
Well, talking of stories choosing you, your children's novel, this is your first children's novel, isn't it? And it's The
yeah,
Kingdom of Broken Magic. Um,
yeah.
how did that come about, and why did you suddenly really want to write a children's novel?
Well, it was just one of the many I started. And I was sorting out my filing cabinet, and I came across this, and it was called, at the time, I'd called it Mrs. Gumbo's Flying Circus. And I started reading it, and I thought, oh, I don't quite like this. And so I started playing around with it, and it was COVID.
Yeah,
So I was stuck at home, and I thought, and I live on, sort of on my own. People couldn't come visit you. I couldn't go
yeah,
visit.
absolutely.
So I sat in my little shed in the garden, and I was just writing. And in fact, all the characters, they were such fun, and they kept me company, and
Lovely.
they made me laugh. And there was like, I mean, it has got a dark side to it,
Mm.
but it was purely from my imagination. I didn't have to do any research or do anything like that. Well,
Yeah,
I did a bit in terms of. The young girl, she's an aerialist, and she does trapeze and stuff like that. So I had to find out what the moves were, and she was being trained. So I had to do a bit of research on like how you train as an aerialist and
yeah,
what you need to know and what you need to do, and that sort of thing. And then circuses in Victorian times, it's sort of a steampunky fantasy thing.
yeah.
But apart from that, so all these characters kept me company and kept me going, and I'd get up in the morning and think, oh, I've got to go and see what the tigers are doing. I've got to go,
Oh,
I
lovely.
really. I enjoyed doing it. It was company for me. It sounds a bit sad, really.
No,
That's
no,
how
it
it
doesn't.
was.
And did you say it was released in September? It's literally just
Yeah,
been released
last year. Yes,
last
I mean
year.
yeah. So I've been going around to schools, etc. I've never done before, and libraries,
Mm.
and I love all that. I love the connection with children, and I love that moment when you're reading the book. Read a
Yeah,
chapter, and they're all fidgeting at the beginning. Children are. Suddenly you get into the chapter, and there's this silence,
yeah,
and you can see their eyes go in, and their faces sort of calm down, and they're in that place that you go to when you're reading.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just such a lovely feeling. I love that, but I just can't stand all the social media stuff. I find that really difficult. But I
Oh,
like this connection with the children.
but that's obviously
So
what's
sort
worked.
of both.
That's what's worked for you then, and that's obviously been very successful. Because obviously at the Blandford Literary Festival, you're actually on Friday going into Milldown and Pimpern First Schools. Um,
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'm really looking forward to it.
So what sort of things do you do in your sessions with the children? Because obviously you use the book, don't you?
Oh, I do. Well, I dress up.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I've got my cloak with all my stars on that sometimes drop off. I've got carry-on crow that I strap to my wrist. I've got my witch's hat. Well, really, it's more a magician's hat.
Mm.
And I've got a lovely dress. It's got stars and moons on and everything. And I've got my suitcase. I've got all sorts of things in the suitcase. And I've got I usually have a little assistant magician. So I've got their cloak in there and their hat. And I've got loads of magic wands. And I'm really keen to get children reading. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's, the Literacy Trust has just come out with a report that, there's a big drop in children
There is,
reading.
isn't it? It's quite frightening, actually. It's a big drop. Yeah, I read that report myself.
Yeah,
It's crazy,
yeah.
absolutely crazy.
It, it's very concerning. And I think particularly with children in sort of lower income groups. So I'm very keen to get children reading
Mm.
and experience that magic of
Yeah.
story. Because that, when I was a child, I think that was the thing that really kept me going. I wasn't happy as a child. It was quite difficult. going to the library and reading and getting lost in books, I
Yeah.
think made a huge difference
Yeah.
to me. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of writers who will say the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
I agree.
but I think so I try to make, and I say to them, I say there's, if say I'm in the classroom, I say there's something, do you believe in magic? And they will say they do, and they put their hands up and they say what things that have happened to them that are magic.
Mm.
And then I say, there's something in this room that's magic. What is it? It's really magical. And they're going, pencils, rubbers, this, that, and the other. And then some bright spark will say books. And I'll say, yes. I said, you open a book. If you open a book, it's just paper and ink. That's all it is, and we're all looking at the paper and the ink and blah, 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 and pictures.
Yeah.
I said, but once you start to read it, there are all these characters that you meet and you actually see in your own mind's eye. But the magic is nobody else can see them.
Yeah.
They'll come into the room and you will be seeing the magician or the mad tiger, but your dad won't see it. Your mum won't see it.
Yeah, no,
And
what a lovely way to get them to see it and to understand that importance of reading and their imagination. That's lovely.
Yes, and you go to a place and you imagine it, but nobody else knows where you are. And it
absolutely.
So I really want to try and get that across to kids, to get them to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And with this book, obviously you use that as a reading tool to the children and basing your characters around it. Will there be more? Is it going to be a series, or are you going to go and do another children's book completely offset from that?
Well, I've just finished another children's book. Whether it'll be published, I don't know. I've called it Kareem and the Magic Wheelie Bin.
Yeah.
So I keep looking at wheelie bins when I go out. It's just
well, they're part of our life. I mean, kids see it all the time. So yeah, why not?
Well, exactly. And I thought, well, I could have a magic carpet, but it's been done to death. Yeah. And I thought, and I looked at I suddenly saw this wheelie bin, and I thought, this is the most ordinary thing that you never notice.
No,
and to turn it into something magical that can fly, and you can have all sorts of adventures in it. So I thought, yeah. So I've just finished that. Whether it will be published or not, I don't know. You never know as a writer, do you?
No. And the illustrations for your books, how did that come about? Do you work with a particular illustrator, or do you do it yourself?
She she was absolutely brilliant. She's a young Polish woman. She lives in Warsaw. She's worked with my publisher, Mika, at Everything with Words. On several books, and she's now winning awards, and I think she really captures some of the dark edginess of the story.
Yeah.
And to be honest, at first I wasn't sure about it. I didn't have a say in anything. I was a bit concerned about a couple of the drawings, but I think that I was overridden, but that's fine. But I just think they're fabulous. They're just really. They really go with the text.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a picture of the picture book, and I thought it was great. I thought it was very, very catching, if I'm honest with you. The cover I thought was brilliant, absolutely fantastic.
Oh, yeah, the covers. Yeah, she did a brilliant job with the cover. I mean, I feel very privileged for her to have illustrated my book. I think. I suppose when writers become famous and everything, they can choose who they want.
Yeah.
But I think I just think she's done a brilliant job.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really good.
But then as a writer, you always see your characters in your mind's eye, and then the illustrator comes along, and they don't see it like you do, and you think,
no, that's right.
But you have to let them use their imagination. You can't, once you've given your book over to the publisher, it's like when your child goes to school on the first day, you're handing them over, and it's the same feeling that the teacher's going to have an input, and all the other children, they're going to make these new friends and all this. It's like that. It's like that with when you hand the book over to. It was like that with the Olive readers. I suddenly thought, gosh, it's not my baby anymore.
No, that's right. It's in somebody else.
And it's not.
Yeah. Well, we are really obviously very, very grateful for you obviously coming on today and having this interview. It's obviously a very quick chat, but also for what you're going to be doing in the schools, Milldown and Pimpen. because you're going to be touching quite a few lives of children, their imagination, and you're going to pique their interest. And that really for us is what the Blandford Literary Festival is all about, including everybody,
Well,
as many people as we can. So we can't thank you enough for doing that. And obviously,
well,
hopefully,
it's fantastic.
yeah, hopefully
I
we'll
wanted to
see
say
you
it's
as well.
what
We'll
you're
see.
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm coming on the weekend. I've got to book some workshops and stuff. But
Yeah.
no, I think it's fantastic what you're doing. I think at a time when literary festivals are actually not sort of like finding it hard going,
Yeah.
I just think the enthusiasm and just like in the community, I just think
Yeah.
it's fantastic. I think it's the way literary festivals should go really
Yeah,
and should
it
be.
is. It is for us. It is very much about community, and we were very keen
Yeah.
to make sure that there was some free events as well as obviously ticketed events. But
Mm.
obviously, your book, will it be available in the Blandford Literary Festival bookshop?
I've got a few copies.
Yeah, but
So
if
I'll be
not,
bringing those. But if
and
not, I
if
mean, I've got some, yeah.
Amazon, we can still get it on Amazon, I presume, and
Yes,
all
I'll be
your
bringing some little ticket things where you can just go straight on via that. It's got a QR
yeah,
code, and you can go onto my
fabulous.
website and book, bookseller and Amazon bookshop and
Yeah.
Amazon.
Well, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Christine, thank you
No,
so much this evening chatting with us, and I look forward to seeing you over the weekend, which is obviously in just a few days' time. So enjoy the rest of your time where you are, and we shall see you then. All right.
all right. Thank you very, very much, Nat. Thank you
No
to
worries.
the Literary
Bye-bye.
Festival. Thank you.